Hello, everybody. Hi, it is I, Hannah Ruhama, the Kombucha Mama, and I have a really special guest here today with me on the Trust Your Gut podcast, and that is the lovely Ellen Zachos, who is an author, a forager, a recipe designer. If it has to do with something you can find in your backyard and eat, she's probably involved in some form or fashion. And we're here today because she just published a new book, Mythic Plants. And I've had the divine pleasure of enjoying this book. But why don't you share a little bit first about your background and how you became interested in foraging?
Well, if you could see my last name up there, and I'm not sure if everybody can, they probably can make a pretty good guess that I am of Greek descent. My dad was born here just months after his parents emigrated, so from Greece, and I've always felt a particularly close connection to Greek mythology. I think because of that. I know loads of people who have not a drop of Greek blood in them also love Greek mythology, but I think yes, like you, yeah, exactly. But I think for me, knowing that I have that blood coursing through my veins made it especially special from the mythology point of view. And when I was a kid, I was fascinated by them, but I wasn't a plant person when I was younger. And when I became one, I realized how many plants played very important roles in different Greek myths and literature. So it just all came together in a perfect storm for me.
I really love that. I think it is in your blood. It's probably in your DNA. It's probably been, something that's been passed down for generations. I absolutely adore myths of all types, from Greek to Celtic to, we were talking earlier about the fairy books. And I think there's just something enduring about those stories. They're so archetypal. They also are such a unique way to understand the world and how it came into being. And I think we're in an age where we've been through many different iterations of religion and spiritualism. And I feel that there is a sort of revival towards the earth and wanting to acknowledge how vibrant, alive, and dynamic she is. And whether you then think of that through fairies or spirits or nymphs or dryads or naiads, I think there's this acknowledgement and understanding that our world is alive and vibrant.
You said so many things there that I wanted to comment on that I've already forgotten what the first ones were. But I will tell you this. I am not an organized religion person, but I do find my my strongest spiritual uplift from nature. And I am not ashamed to admit that there are times when I literally have to go up to a tree and wrap my arms around it because I want to breathe it in. I want to smell it. I want to feel it. Um, and if that counts as something spiritual, then that's where I find my spirituality.
I love that. I'm even today, a day like today that's gray and rainy, I burst out of the door singing songs of praise to the world. They're all just randomly made up in the moment. I'm just so grateful to be yet another living creature on this beautiful planet that we're on. And, we can't help but be intertwined with all of the living things around us. When I talk about diversity, especially in particular about gut microbiome diversity, the thing I always say is we don't find monoculture in nature, right? You don't have one type of grass, one type of flower, one type of tree, one type of bird. There's a whole ecosystem that's flourishing together. And I think what I really love about your book and the work that you do is helping people to connect with just as simple as your backyard, or probably even a little garden you can put on your balcony if you don't have a yard, or going to the park, or going to a forest preserve, or going to a commons, if you will, where, in ancient times, that's where people would derive their nourishment. That's where people would go to supplement their diet, is to the commons and secure mushrooms and plants and all kinds of things there. So what led you on this journey to become a backyard forager?
Oh gosh. Well, that's interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. There's another Greek connection there. So, when I still lived in New York City, I was I had decided I didn't want to be a performer anymore. I did a little bit of Broadway with Les Miserables, but the life was not the life I wanted. So I went back to school at the New York Botanic Garden. And when I was there, I met another woman doing exactly the same thing, but she was retiring from a career in dance. She'd been a member of the American Ballet Theater. So we bonded in botany class, and it turns out that, like me, she was half Greek. Her name was Leda, and she was named after Leda and the Swan, a really well-known Greek myth. And I hired her to be part of my gardening crew because I was running at the time when I left showbiz. I started a design build installation business. And so she worked for me, and we were sitting out in a garden one day having lunch in Westchester, and I had had nothing in my refrigerator that morning except like bread and cheese, which is not a bad thing. But she reached over, grabbed some garlic mustard, and said, "Here, put this in your sandwich. It'll make it better." And she was right. It did. And I was hooked because it was like just right there, and it was free, and it tasted really good. And I had no idea it even existed. So that's how I came to the foraging side of things. And of course, it took some time after that. I read everything I could get my hands on, and I did plant walks, and I went to festivals, and now I teach at festivals, and I lead plant walks, and I write books. So it's been a journey.
Well, and I think that first of all, life is always a journey. That's why we're here, is to go on the journey. And who knows where it takes us, right? It was a chance meeting with a friend from college who had a jar of kombucha that we didn't even try
Oh,
that turned me on to it. And little did I know I would end up where I am as the Kombucha Mama with the best-selling book, the founder of the Trade Association, right? Like, so there's so many exciting things that can come out of these chance meetings in our
yeah,
life.
yeah.
And it's when we heed that call, when there's that little like, ooh, there's something here for me. And we follow that and pursue that. Like you said, I checked out every book in the library on kombucha. I, instantly wanted to be friends with every single producer and tell the whole world about it. And now I'm like you, that teacher, that author, that expert. And, expertise comes from doing it. Right.
Hmm.
And so for anyone who's curious about starting to be a backyard forager, to try to see what food might be in your yard, definitely go to your website, which is thebackyardforager.com.
No, just
Okay.
backyardforager.com.
Backyardforager.com, or follow you on Instagram or social, and you have free classes, you have blogs full of recipes. Like, there's so many wonderful resources that people can hook into and really get a sense of what's available to them
Hmm.
right in their own backyard.
Yeah, yeah.
So speaking of, so some of these plants that are in
Yeah.
here. So one of the stories that I think is so, it's really foundational, is that story of Prometheus and how he brought
Yeah.
fire from the gods to man. Because here we were, these, according to the myth, pitiful creatures eating raw meat like animals.
Yep. Yeah. And Prometheus paid some serious consequences for that, but he knew he was going to have to because in Greek his name means forethought, which basically means he could see the future. So he knew that he would be punished for this. He also knew he would one day be set free. And the thing that's and this is one of the things that I love about these stories. So the story goes that Prometheus snuck up to Mount Olympus, and he took a stalk of giant fennel, which can be like this thick. I mean, it can be like 3 to 4 inches thick. And he went up to Hephaestus's workshop. Hephaestus was the god of metallurgy and fire. And he stole an ember from Hephaestus's fire and put it in the stalk and came back down to earth and gave it to man. And they were able to start fire with it. And the thing that's so cool to me is that with that giant stalk with the green pith inside, you really could carry an ember and not, it would be protected so it wouldn't catch on fire, but it would keep it warm so it would still be glowing. So there's some possible realism in there. Now, also, Prometheus, when I say he suffered for this, Zeus was not happy with him for doing this. Zeus wanted to be in control of everything. So he chained him to a cliff in the Caucasus Mountains. Yeah, just like that. And every day, an eagle would come and eat out his liver. And then every night his liver would grow back. So it was unending torture until the day that Prometheus knew something that would save Zeus a lot of trouble. And he said, I will tell you if you will free me. And so Zeus sent Heracles to free Prometheus. Prometheus gave Zeus the information he needed, and his torture was over.
But there's on a certain level, this had to happen because how could the humans appreciate the gods if they couldn't even feed themselves properly? I don't know. It seems like this was to Zeus's benefit.
And this is the other thing. Some people back in the day, like 3,000 years ago, thought that this was literal, that this literally happened. And other people took it as a political commentary, with Zeus being the tyrant ruler and Prometheus being the rebel acting for the people, and that what he brought with him was not literally fire, but was actually enlightenment. And that it may have just been a safer way to criticize the government than it was, to just come right out and say something. So there's all kinds of ways to look at these stories, which I think.
Well, and I think that that's true of the stories of all religious. Now they might say, no, these are literal, these are things that really happen. But I think, again, there's so much debate around it. We're not going to go into that. But I think what you're saying and what's important is to find those kernels of truth or of metaphor that can be excavated from any kind of myth. Sure, we can think of them literally, but when we go to that metaphoric realm, there's so much more information we can derive from them. I think one of the interesting things here is the liver does regenerate. How fascinating.
I hadn't even thought of that, Hannah. You're absolutely right, that you can have part of your liver surgically removed and it will grow back. Damn, that's good. Wow, I wish I'd put that in my book. Thank you. I love it. I'm going to use that for my presentations in the future. That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Well, because I think so many of the plants in here, and this is our original materia medica, right?
Yeah.
All herbology, all of nature, it was our pharmacy, if you will, or was our, where we went to find the cure.
That's all we had.
Yeah. Well, and on a certain level, that's all we still have, because where do pharmaceutical drugs get their inspiration? It's always from, what's the one active ingredient that I can then patent and then, make $1 bajillion on.
Yeah. But the thing is that sometimes when you remove that thing that you think is the one active ingredient, it just doesn't work as well as it did in conjunction with all the other phytochemicals that were in the plant. And I am not an herbalist and I'm not a scientist, but I do know that much is true.
Exactly right. And I think that, we can know a lot here's what I was going to say, is that human beings knew how to work with these plants. So we had a little bit of this discussion in our first call, but I think, we live in a world of materialism where we measure things based on what we can see, what we can measure. It has to be tangible. And yet human beings have, and many creatures have, this ability to, have intuition, or we have a knowing of something, or we get dreams. Like so many scientists, even Einstein, got their inspiration for their most groundbreaking theories that they couldn't even necessarily prove in that moment from dreams. And so I feel like there's this world, this liminal world of magic, of course, but also where, we commune with plants and the world in different ways. And it's been manifested through, for example, this is sort of an arcane example, but the I Ching is 64 hexagrams. Well, it also corresponds to the fact that we have 64 chromosomes in our body. So on a certain level, there's of course, we know everything about what it means to be a human being and to live on this planet because we inhabit our body. So whether we've had scientific research to validate and prove every single little underlying mechanism, the reality is the phenomena already exist, that we know these things and have been practicing them for thousands of years. And so the wisdom of the stories and the plants themselves really comes through in this book.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that.
Well, so what's one of your favorites from the book?
I really love a lot of them, but I think my favorite story is the one about Molly. And if anybody has read Circe or is familiar with that story, they may be familiar with the plant because um, that's the plant that saved Odysseus. When Odysseus landed on Circe's island with his men, he sent a bunch of them off to see what they could see, and they didn't come back. And so he sent some more off, and they didn't come back either. And he thought, well, I guess I better go find out what's going on. And as he walked through the woods, Hermes, the messenger of the gods, came down and he said, "Hang on a second, I have some information for you." And he pulled up this plant and he gave it to Odysseus and he said, "Circe has turned your men into pigs. You have to eat this plant. It's going to prevent her from being able to turn you into a pig." And for millennia, classicists and botanists have argued over what this plant could possibly be. And we know from reading Homer and from reading Theophrastus, who was, the botanist who wrote in about 300 BC, all about plants, tons of stuff about plants. They describe it as having a white flower, a black bulb, and linear leaves like a squill. So we can rule out some of the things that people thought. It's not going to be cyclamen with leaf shape like that. It's not going to be an onion because it doesn't have the smell. It's not going to be something with yellow flowers. But what it could be, and what I think is the best possible plant for it, is the snowdrop, Galanthus nivalis, because it's got a white flower, a black bulb, it's got strap-like foliage, and two other things that are really key. In the Odyssey, Hermes says to Odysseus, "This is an easy plant for the gods to grow, to dig up, but very difficult for humans." Now, why could that be? Well, anybody who's ever grown snowdrops in their garden knows that these plants go dormant. They come up really early in spring, and then, depending on where you live, in April through the end of the year, you can't see them above ground. Their foliage has all died back. So it would be very hard for a human being to find at a certain time of year. But gods are omnipotent. They know everything. And the best thing of all is that Galanthus nivalis contains a plant chemical called galantamine. And this chemical is actually used to contradict a certain type of hallucination called anticholinergic hallucinations. And this is probably what Circe had done to Odysseus's men. Did she really turn them into pigs? Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Personally, I find it more likely that she was a very skilled herbalist. She probably gave them some plant to eat that made them hallucinate and think they were pigs, and then later gave them Molly to make them come back to themselves. And today, that same chemical is used to alleviate the symptoms of Alzheimer's in people with beginning to moderate Alzheimer's. So there are some properties to that plant that obviously the Greeks knew about or had stories about, and we're just starting to discover them today. And I just find that fascinating.
See, I think you're underlining the whole point I just made, which is human beings have always understood intrinsically properties. Now, how we got that knowledge, whether it was trial and error and somebody died or a few somebody's died along the way, or if it was some other kind of plant communication, or maybe it's while taking some of these, plant medicines that allow our minds to expand. So one of those that you talk about that's, pretty popular still in the United States is cannabis.
Yeah. And the Greeks used cannabis, and for centuries, classical scholars were like, "Oh no, we can't talk about that," because it was shameful in some way. But the fact is, for the Greeks, the cannabis plant was an important source of fiber and of medicine, and it was used as a psychoactive drug. And we have concrete evidence of that. The Scythian tombs have been uncovered that show exactly the same paraphernalia used for basically smoking weed that Herodotus wrote about in 600 BC. And for centuries after that, classicists were like, "Oh no, Herodotus was making it up." And then in 1999, a Scythian tomb was uncovered with exactly the same stuff in it. So he was not making it up. And at the Oracle of the Dead in northern Greece, they have found incense burners that contain the remnants of hash, which was burned to give the people who went there, who were seeking communication with their dearly departed, would make their dreams more intense, would allow them more mental freedom to communicate with the people they wanted to ask questions of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shame came in later, and you talk a little bit about that story. The reality is it's been part of, Chinese medicine and herbalism, and it's something that there's evidence for dating back thousands and thousands of years. So
Yeah.
it's clear that many of these plants we've had a long term relationship with, and it's only sort of our cultural perceptions that have shifted how we use these things. Another example, the opium poppy, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's been a powerful medicine that people have used. And of course, it then got abused and used against people in wars and different things. But, you know, like everything, how you use it or your intention behind it is what's going to determine positive or negative impact.
Yeah. And what you say, what your intentions are, that comes into play, especially with the poppy, because the you can call it the opium poppy. Some people call it a bread poppy or a seed poppy. It's Papaver somniferum. That's the one that has the psychoactive properties to it. And it is now considered a controlled substance by the DEA. And oftentimes people will say to me, well, can you grow poppies in your garden? And the answer is, that depends. It depends on your intention. Like you just said, if you love poppies, I love poppies. I think they are some of the most beautiful flowers, and they self-seed. I mean, very few petals, double, triple petals. The colors are so vibrant and rich. I love them. And if I grow them because they're beautiful flowers, that's perfectly safe. But if I'm going to publish a recipe for using them to make some kind of drug, that is not okay as far as the government is concerned. And there have been instances documented of people recently being taken to court for growing these poppies. And the judge, if it's somebody who's just growing them because they're a gardener and they love them, the judge is like, okay, never mind, go home, water your garden. But there are also people who have been sharing information on how to use the dried poppy straw as a sleep aid or to get high. And those people are punished. So keep the intention in mind.
Absolutely. Well, and it of course reminds me of the Seinfeld episode where Elaine keeps failing her drug test because she's eating the poppy seed bagels.
Yeah. And poppy seeds, I will tell you, actually have no psychoactive properties in them at all. And that's why they're legal. But the dried stems, leaves, and seed capsule, not the seeds, but the capsule, do have some psychoactive properties to them. Now, I'm not talking about like going into a lab and making morphine, but apparently people make a tea out of the poppies, which I have never tried, although I am curious.
Well, and then wasn't it the poppies in The Wizard of Oz? The Field of Poppies, where she falls asleep and
yeah.
So
she lies down in the field and
exactly. So there's been sort of this cultural recognition of what these plants can do, and it's popped up a couple of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other myths that I absolutely adore is that of Persephone.
Yeah.
It's so obviously it's an intense tale. There's all kinds of high drama that happens in it. But the thing I didn't remember was if she ate the seeds of the pomegranate in Hades, she would have to return to the underworld. I forgot that was a key part of that story. So will you share just a quick rendition of it for us?
I will. And, I just love this story so much. And I don't know, I think it's a woman thing. And I don't mean to exclude anybody, but I just think because it's the mother-daughter relationship, it has special resonance for me. So Demeter was the goddess of the harvest. She was also the sister of Zeus. And as you probably know, anybody who's read a little mythology knows that the Greek gods didn't really care if they were brother and sister. They all had sex and they all had children, and that's just how it was. So Zeus and Demeter, brother and sister, were the parents of Persephone. Persephone was out with her friends, nymphs, fellow immortals picking flowers one day, and she saw this amazing narcissus that had 100 flowers, and she couldn't resist. So she went over to the plant, and just as she got there, the ground opened up beneath her, and Hades appeared on his chariot, and he grabbed her and he took her back down to the underworld to be his queen. And Zeus is the one who created that plant. He was in cahoots with Hades because Hades had said, hey, I want Persephone to be my queen. And Zeus was like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. But Demeter was really, really upset about this. She did not like that her daughter had been kidnapped and taken so far away. And she did everything she could to find her daughter. But none of the fellow gods and goddesses would tell her because they were all afraid of Zeus. So she wandered the earth. And in her grief, she made all plants stop growing. And she was goddess of the harvest, so she had that power. And very quickly, Zeus realized that if all plants died, humans would starve and nobody would be left to worship the gods. So he said to Hades, you know what? This was not such a great idea. You have to send her back. And before he did that, Hades said, hey, Persephone, are you hungry? Do you want a little snack for the road? And he offered her a pomegranate, and she ate some seeds. And people say, oh, she ate 3, she ate 6. Who cares? For every seed that she ate, she then later had to return to the underworld to be Hades' queen for that same number of months. And that's how the Greeks explained the difference between winter and summer, between the growing season and the barren season. So the barren season, when nothing grows, is when Persephone is underground. And when she returns to Earth, and there was a giant festival for this every year at a town called Alephsis that was very close to Athens. When she returns to Earth, that's the beginning of the growing season again, and that's when life resumes. And that festival at Alephsis, the thing that was so cool about that, there are many things, but one of the things is that people who attended came away from it feeling that death was no longer a terrifying thing. They were celebrating the return of Persephone to life, and it reinforced their belief that death was just a part of the cycle of life. So just so interesting in so many ways, and with so many different plants associated with it.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, Narcissus, which we know turned into a flower for there's various explanations, but basically out of ego. And so for her right, her ego on a certain level was attracted to this insane beauty. And then that's what lured her into the trap. And I love this about death just being a part of life, because I think we get so caught up for whatever reason in fearing death. And that then leads us to making choices in life that limit our ability to truly enjoy being here. I mentioned earlier, I'm from a Celtic background, and, they were all about reincarnation, hence some of the human sacrifices they would do, or this or that. And I feel like that is just something I've always trusted, that, whatever this life is, I'm here to live it the fullest I can. And I always assume I'll live to 100, so I don't have to worry about if, when, and how that might happen. And obviously I'm making, choices along the way that are going to sustain that belief. But I think there's, I love what you're saying about Persephone coming back and this whole festival and people really feeling that connection to the cycles of life, because in fermentation, essentially what we're doing is life is being decayed, is being broken down, and yet it becomes the nutrients or the source of life for the next thing to come through. And that's true of human bodies. And, everything needs to go through this cycle of life and decay. And there's beauty in decay. There's oftentimes a lot of beauty in it, but we are right now in the time of Persephone.
Yes, we are.
The growing season has started again.
Yep.
And so it's exciting to be in that dynamic. I mean, you really feel that energy as human beings. We're so connected because, of course, we are nature, that I can't help but, this is why, even though it's gray, I'm like singing. I hear the bird trilling. It literally started on, the equinox. And I just feel so excited that life is returning. The bees are coming back. You see the signs, the flowers. Being here in California, people are like, you don't have seasons. And I'm like, well, we do. We have jasmine season and jacaranda season. And, it all is sort of like what life is really in full bloom at that point. And I think that's a great way to kind of think about the seasons, is what's in bloom right now. But we have this sense that we have to constantly be growing and striving and pushing, and yet we need that downtime. We need that barrenness. We need that calm, so that we have the energy then to start a growing season again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and how much power in that story of, the woman representing life force, right?
Well, yeah, and not being and the king of the gods not being able to change her mind or counteract what she has done, because even though he was king of the gods, no god could undo another god's magic. So when Demeter caused things not to grow, Zeus couldn't just go bada bing and make things grow again. So really, she had the power of the world in her hands.
But there's like this necessary component of the male and female, right? We can look at the yin yang, we can look at those types of things, and we see how we need both of these components in balance and in harmony, if you will, working together in order for life to exist. So,
although there are some stories in Greek mythology where gods and people were born from a single parent. So you had or maybe not. You had Athena, who was born from the head of Zeus. And that's the myth that I learned as a child. But the thing is, when you start getting into the myths more and more, you realize that there are so many different versions of every story. And part of that depends on where you lived, because different places had different explanations for how things came to be. And I read later that Zeus had another wife before Hera, maybe even more than one. And one of them, he actually ate because he was told that she was too powerful. And when he consumed her, she was pregnant with Athena. And that's why Athena popped out of the head. So was she really born of Zeus only, or was she not? I don't know.
Well, and then there's where someone gets sewed into a leg, and
Yes.
It's pretty bloody and violent how we even get to Zeus in the first place. Gaia and Uranus are pretty intense.
There's a lot of blood and a lot of violence in these stories. Yes. Yeah.
But I think that's also accurate for life. I get we live in a time where we're not exposed to that as much, even to the point where we don't, slaughter our own animals, and we've been kind of divorced from the reality of this cycle of life and death. And I'm not advocating that we all live in a bloody, bloody way, but there is something of value to understand that life isn't just a given, that there is struggle.
And you and I may not be struggling, but there are plenty of people today. I mean, there's plenty of blood and guts going on in war zones. There are plenty of people who survive as hunters and gatherers still, who do slaughter their own meat, who do forage for their own plants. So I think that's got to be a basic part of human nature on some level.
Yeah, and I think as folks who live, quote unquote, civilized lives, it's valuable for us to not be so divorced from that real world that it's good for us to then visit it through these myths, through these stories, through engaging in that backyard foraging, having chickens. There's so many different ways in which, even in our modern city urban lifestyle, that we can still connect to these ancient practices, rituals, and ways in which human beings have always existed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a great conversation. I love this book. I love these myths. If you're someone who wants to learn more about foraging, go ahead and tell them again where they can find you, Ellen.
So my foraging website is backyardforager.com, and you'll find loads of recipes there and plant profiles as well. If you're more interested in the mythology, I have a new website, and it's just mythicplants.com. Mostly what that website does is there was so much research that went into this book, because I didn't want to just tell the stories and say, and you have to take my word for it. So there's more than 300 citations, both from the original texts and also from the modern scientific research. So if you read something that I've written and you're like, well, I don't know if that's really true, you can go to my website and find the citation from that page that says, okay, the National Institute of Health has done this study and they show that this plant chemical from yarrow really does act as a styptic and can stop blood flow. So when they say that Achilles used it on the battlefield, okay, maybe there was some truth to that. But you don't have to just take my word for it. So if you're interested in that kind of background, mythicplants.com is a good place to go.
I'm gonna have to go check that out because I'm like thirsting for more. And I know
Yeah.
you only get so many words in a book.
Right.
And there's so much more that goes into distilling it into that. So that's really wonderful. We are going to give away a copy of the book. So everybody stay tuned to our socials. We'll have more information on how you can get your very own copy of Mythic Plants. And thanks again, Ellen. We've so enjoyed this conversation with you today.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for having me, Hannah.